Hey, I want to talk a little bit about discipline and education and issues around this because I've come across an edition or supplement in the Times, the London Times, about the Michaela Community School. It's been described as Britain's strictest school. It's in Wembley in northwest London, and it's got quite a few headlines because of the ethos of its head teacher, Catherine Birbal Singh. Um, I have to be honest, my main instinct about this is slight unease. However, I want to be fair and I can see some merits in what they seem to be doing. But I want to just express because I come from a teaching background. Being a teacher, I have worked with a range of different age groups. Um, Not within the UK. Haven't taught in the UK. I've been a teacher abroad. And I'm saying that with caution because what I find is when you're quite open about these things, people then think it's an invitation to attack you, like, where did you teach and how many students, and they feel it's gives them a right to sort of interrogate you. But suffice to say, I've got experience of teaching. Um, but anyway, I've seen a range of different methods and a range of different approaches to teaching. Just recognize my hair is out of line there. Um, but my issue is about balance. I really, really do believe that the best approach, not just to teaching, but to so many things in life, is balance. Now, in the UK context, I do believe that we have serious discipline problems in this country. Um, and if we look at London, we look at a situation where you see youth gangs, knife crime running wild. And I do think that among a lot of young people, there is a serious problem with, I sound like an old man here, but with discipline and respecting, their elders and so on. Having said that, that isn't all young people, and I don't agree with those who say, "Oh, all British youth are feral and terrible," and I don't believe that for a second. I've met many young people, teenagers, children who are respectful and polite, and so what I'm saying is it's not my experience that there's a universal situation. Um, One thing that makes me uneasy about the Michaela school, and I will give it credit, so bear with me, but one thing that makes me uneasy is we are only hearing the head teacher's perspective. We are only hearing their, frankly, propaganda of how perfect it is. They have a number of videos on YouTube, and the comments are completely blocked on all the videos. The discussion section is blocked. Well, there is no discussion section. So that makes me wonder, well, what exactly is the point of this? If you're making these videos to promote the school, who is that for? Because it's basically just propaganda. If you are promoting yourself as a school, now presumably this is for parents to see, so they know what the school is like to send their children to. But I just feel that there is a very one-sided aspect to this. Um, Now, to be fair, Good Morning Britain did interview her and they did put her on the spot and present the counter argument, although they also disabled comments so people couldn't share their thoughts on that. And I noticed that thumbs up, thumbs down was about 50-50. Now, in the poll that Good Morning Britain done, the question was, should there be more discipline in British schools? It was a resounding 85% said yes, and I'm not surprised by that. So I suppose from that point of view, a lot of people would support the Michaela School, and I would to an extent. I do feel that perhaps we do have a serious problem with discipline. I mean, I remember it's obviously been years since I've been in like school age. I'm 32 now. We're talking many years, but when I was sort of in my teens, and I was going to school. I remember sympathising with the teachers and sometimes the sort of abuse and back answering and disrespect that they had to put up with. Teaching is a difficult, difficult job, but the best teachers are those who want to do it. That goes without saying. Um, Certainly, from my perspective, I've always enjoyed teaching. It doesn't mean it's always been easy, but I've always, it's never been something that you do for money. No teacher in the world would say they're motivated by money. I'd be surprised if there was many that said that, regardless of the education system. um, and it does vary from country to country. But I feel that there is some areas that make me uneasy about this. The school day apparently is 8 hours, 9 to 4, and they have 1.5 hours homework as well. Now that is quite lengthy by any imagination. There are many jobs that adults do that wouldn't be that strenuous. Um, and as the presenter on Good Morning Britain asked, well, how do they lead, a normal children's life? How do they have time to do other things? And the head teacher was kind of defensive about that. She said, "Oh, but the children these days do this and that." I didn't think that was a very good answer because the whole point of her regime is that they don't have time to do that because they're constantly under pressure to complete the homework and so on. Now she was saying that they teach the children this ethos of respect, of politeness, and so on, that the children in that school offer their seats on buses and so on. I'm not going to fault that. I think that's a good thing. And I do think that children should be taught basic politeness. There's far too many adults in this country lack basic manners. And manners is something I do feel is pretty important. It's something I do put quite a big emphasis on. So I don't criticize that principle, but one thing that does make me uneasy is that she says that the head teacher says that the whole idea of people think discipline, they think that's oppressive. But again, we're only hearing her side. I mean, her version of things is everything's perfect and everyone's happy. That might be true, but the children, the students, because they're so basically under such pressure to follow this regime, and presumably their parents agree with the mindset of the school. I don't think they're going to dissent if if they did feel uncomfortable, if they did feel they were under too much pressure, would they be in a position to say anything? That's what makes me uneasy. Now, to me, there's two extremes. I don't support the ultra liberal model of just let students do whatever they want. I do think that in a school you need discipline. I absolutely believe in that. You absolutely do, because if an adult doesn't have some semblance of authority, then things will collapse. So, absolutely, I would support that argument. You need discipline, and you need to sometimes enforce that. But to me, there is another extreme. I mean, one thing that makes me uneasy is the approach that they take, or apparently they've published a book and they call it um, the hymn of the tiger teachers or something to that effect. Now, that immediately got me thinking. Clearly, they're making allusions here to the hymn of the tiger mother by Amy Chua, which was a very controversial book, still controversial, and Amy Chua has no shortage of critics. Um, I am very critical of that sort of parenting. I'm not a parent myself, but I feel that it's too extreme. Um, this is no different from, I mean, obviously very different, but it's the other side of the coin from that extreme liberal approach of you can't discipline children, you can't tell them off because it might stigmatize them. Now, to be fair, the head teacher says they take a strong line against bullying. I completely commend that. I support that. And I think that is a good thing. She said, for example, children aren't laughed at for raising their hand. Okay, that's good. But here's my question. Well, what is her attitude to children who are falling behind? Does she stigmatize them as losers? Does she help them out on an individual basis? I do feel that there is a slightly totalitarian aspect to this sort of military style education. And that's something that makes me uncomfortable. I'll be honest, it makes me uncomfortable. Um, I think it's disingenuous to say, oh, but they've got time. They do have time. Not under her regime, they don't seem to have time. I mean, yes, we want children that are polite and respectful, but do we want children that are Stepford wives? Because there's an aspect to this. It seems to me that this style of teaching is pushing perfection. And what Catherine Birbal Singh and other tiger type people with that tiger ethos need to understand is that perfection does not exist. And that's the problem I have with it. To me, being a good teacher isn't about pushing perfection. It's about pushing students to the best of their ability, but not to the point where they are feeling so much pressure that it becomes too much. bear in mind, if pressure made people happy, then countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan would be some of the happiest places in the world, but they're not. They have very high suicide rates. And I think there is a direct correlation there with the sort of pressures from the work environment, from the education environment. I know in China, which I have experience of, there are talk there is talk of reforming the Chinese education system. So people in the West who say, "Oh, we need to copy Asian countries," are being very naive, because within Asian countries there are debates going on about whether it really is the best approach. So I really think that for me, there is some merit with this, definitely taking a strong line against bullying, teaching children respect, and having a certain degree of authority. I'm all for all those things. But the length of the day and the military style precision of it, I do feel uncomfortable about. I feel that is taking things a bit too far. I mean, she's saying we're bringing up these children to be polite and respectful. That's all very well, and maybe the signs of that are being seen. But by the same token, she could be bringing out control freaks who are constantly judging other people, and that is not a good thing. I mean, my whole issue with Amy Stewart was her whole thing was perfection. Now, I have a question to those who support this sort of tiger parenting approach. How would you deal with a child who has dyslexia, who has learning difficulties? Would you, bully them into perfection? There are a lot of issues that I think are not taken into account when you have this one size fits all mentality. Um, Clearly, it isn't practical to have a situation where you say, oh, each child is an individual, so we have to kind of follow their, children are children. You have to have authority to some extent. But I agree with what the presenter on Good Morning Britain asked. He said, well, there is a school of thought that would say children should be children. And I totally agree with that as well. Children have to have leisure time, children have to have downtime. And I must say, I am suspicious of anyone who wants to live through their child's success, who wants to, hothouse their child 12 hours a day or something so they get perfect grades. That to me is not benevolent. That to me is extreme. Because a healthy child to me is not one who is hothoused to the point of exhaustion. She said the children come into the school are not tired. I would take that with a pinch of salt. I mean, like I say, another thing that makes me uncomfortable about this is it seems to be entirely one sided. All the opinions are from the staff, who all share the ethos of the head teacher. Um, I wonder if the students were asked, would they be honest? Would they say how they're really feeling, or would they say what they're being forced to say, basically? Um, so if you're familiar with this school, you might know more than I do. I mean, I must say I don't know everything about this. I'm not pretending that I know this school inside out. I'm just going on my surface perception of it. I can see some merits, but I can also see there are aspects to it that do make me uncomfortable. Um, Discipline, yes. Anti-bullying, absolutely yes. And that's something I've always said. I do think that there should be much more authority given to teachers to crack down on bullying. So I totally support that. That's a good thing. I think teaching basic manners is definitely a good thing. But I'm somewhat uneasy about the military style precision of it all and the push for perfection. Because the real world, people are not perfect. That's not preparing children for the world. That's telling children, oh, in the real world, you have to be perfect. That is not realistic. And I think it could potentially have negative consequences. It could lead these children to going out into the real world and looking down on everyone else who doesn't match their standards. Now, that to me is not necessarily a good thing. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts. But ultimately, I think it comes down to balance. I do think we need more discipline in schools in this country, definitely. But um, I've seen the effects firsthand of hothousing, and that sort of tiger parenting approach, and I don't think it's always the best thing. I really don't.